What's interesting is how these countries have moved or evolved in terms of happiness. And US used to be in the top five. Now it's around 25. So it's definitely,
Really?
yeah,
So it's the 25th most happy country in the world.
yeah. I think our health has become, physical health has become far worse.
Really interesting.
So when somebody's happy, even if they're doing important things, even if they're doing serious things, there is a lightheartedness in how you go about doing those things.
And just because of I have muscle memory, right? I'm
Yeah,
walking down the street and I make eye contact and I
yeah,
smile,
yeah.
and people go, "What is wrong with you?" Like,
Dr. Raj Raghunathan is a professor at the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin, where he teaches one of the most popular courses on happiness in the world.
He's the author of the best-selling book, If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy?, which explores the surprising reasons why success doesn't always lead to joy and what to do about it. The book has been translated into over 13 languages, and his insights have been featured in TEDx Talks, The Atlantic, Forbes, and more.
and I find Americans to be extremely averse to those things. You're so smart, and you're not happy. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think.
Do you ever feel like something's holding you back from reaching your full potential? I'm giving away free access to my Xponential scorecard. It's the same tool I use with clients to uncover strengths and reveal hidden areas that might be holding you back. It's a powerful first step towards real growth. You can access your personalized assessment at exponential.life/score. So we are friends and we live in the same city. So we've had all kinds of offline discussions about this. But you and I are both fascinated by this topic of human flourishing, human happiness, and things like that. And you wrote a book with the perfect title, in my opinion. Basically, the title is, if you're so smart, how come you're not happy? Something along those lines. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
butchering it a little bit, but
No. Yeah, if you're so smart, why aren't you happy?
why aren't
Yeah,
you
how
happy?
come? How come? And why are the same thing? So yeah.
I've observed this quite a bit in America, and especially as an immigrant coming in. You sort of have this image that there's so much prosperity, so much opportunity,
Hmm.
so much freedom, right? And and yet I find Americans to be less happy than I would expect them to be, considering
Hmm.
considering just the possibilities they have.
Hmm.
Why is that?
We have had data on happiness levels of countries for about 40 years now, reliable data across a variety of countries. And in general, the happiness levels of the richer countries, the more developed nations, and I think a metric that most people would agree with for this is GDP per capita, right?
Yeah.
Um, is very highly correlated with the happiness levels of the citizens of these countries. So you find that, for example, countries that have per capita GDP of, let's say, over $40,000, and US is in that bucket, are happier than countries with less than that. But what's interesting is how these countries have moved or evolved in terms of happiness. And US used to be in the top five for a very, very, almost the entire 40-year period, at least until about 2010. And then it started kind of slipping down. And then I noticed that it went down to 12, and then 15, 17, 23. Now it's around 25. So it's
Really?
definitely slipped, yeah.
So it's the 25th most happy country in the world.
So it's definitely come down, and we can kind of like think about why this might be the case. It's not as if we have become materially worse off. If anything, I think we've become better off. Materially, I think more of us has access to things that would have seemed like luxuries. But there are many indicators, and I think that one of the indicators for why it is that we are not as happy is just plain pure basic health. I think our health has become, physical health has become far worse.
Really interesting.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. I mean, like almost any metric that you take now, we are worse off than citizens of the US of a comparable age where. So this is something that most people would not think that a happiness expert might point to as a big reason for the dip in happiness levels. But I do think that it's a very important.
So if you're a
Um,
smart person, just like
mhm,
you say in your book, if you're smart, how come you're not happy? How would you shop? You go into an HEB grocery store.
mhm, mhm.
Um, what would you do?
Yeah, yeah. I think that. a very simple thing that one needs to do is that, try and avoid processed food.
So, do you see when you teach and you teach a happiness course? Is what's the title of the course that you teach at UT?
It's actually, the title has nothing related to happiness in it. It's creativity and leadership, and there's a small story behind it.
Okay.
I put this course together on happiness, and I gave it to my chair, and he said, "Yeah, this looks great. I mean, this is the kind of thing that I think that the students need. Let me see what the dean's office says." And the dean's office looked at it, and they say, "Oh, this sounds interesting. Um, we would like Raj to offer it." But they came back to the chair, and they told him that he needs to change the title of the course. I'd call the course A Life of Happiness and Fulfillment.
Yeah.
And the dean's office came back and said, that doesn't sound like a business school course.
That's right. Yeah. So let's call it leadership and
Exactly.
creativity.
So,
Yeah.
so, so I ended up calling it creativity and leadership.
Yeah. That
I'm excited.
correlates. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's funny.
exactly.
Do you see in those 15 years that you've taught this to, younger people, um, a shift in their mindset? Like the average student that comes your way 15 years ago and the average student that comes your way today. Has there been a trend of some sort when it comes to how they perceive it, how they perceive happiness, the state they're in, why they're interested in the first place, all of that?
For sure, Christian. I unfortunately, the one of the biggest trends is not a positive one. I think that I do see that there's a lot more students who feel more lost, more anxious, more stressed out,
Really?
more feeling of helplessness. And I think that for me, right from the start, and this might be because, I was always very focused on this topic of happiness from a very young age. And also because, I started to research it and so on. So it probably got reinforced. So for me, it was very clear that the top priority for me is to give them a very strong foundation to lead a happy life. Okay. And this really translated into thinking about whenever it is I was interacting with them or was going to say something to them, to ask myself this question: is this thing that I'm about to do or about to say, is it going to give them a more solid platform for being happier? Or is it going to give them a more solid platform for something else? But the way that I've approached my parenting is that, well, I want to give them a solid foundation of happiness. That's the important thing for me. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The performance, the achievement, and all that is less important to me than happiness.
And what that would bring is sort of it would affirm something in him that is essentially a motivator to do the thing better anyway. Correct? Would that be?
Exactly. I think that's the thing, that it's a win-win when you prioritize happiness.
Yeah.
I think that it leads you to be in a better mental state. Sometime back, I said that people who are happier, even if they're doing serious and important things, they don't take themselves too seriously. They have a certain lightheartedness about them,
Mm-hmm.
which is so important to be resilient.
Yeah.
If everything is the end of the world and you're taking it personally,
Yeah.
you're
You're not
going
gonna
to get
last
beaten
long.
down. You're
Yeah.
going to get burned. Yeah, you're going to get.
You see somebody in that moment. What do I do next? What made me happy
Hmm.
yesterday is not
Hmm.
making me happy today, and I
Hmm.
could feel that internal tension rising up, and
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I gotta make a move. What are some of
Hmm.
the happiness perhaps tweaks there that you can recommend?
Yeah, I think the area of research that's most relevant for this is something called job crafting.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it involves kind of nudging your work, your what you do for work, in a direction that's more meaningful and fulfilling and happiness inducing for you. And I think a lot of people have this belief that, hey, what I'm doing currently is not meaningful, not fulfilling. It may have been good for me in terms of paying the bills, and I'm good at doing this, and I built my network in this area, and but I don't really like it. Every day I dread going into the office. It's not something that excites me anymore, right? So I feel like I'm drained of energy, and yet I have to kind of continue to do this because there are bills waiting for me to be paid, right? Or a family that depends on me, and so on and so forth. And so the recommendation here, and this is not based off of my research, it's based off of research by a few people, including Herminia Ibarra and Adam Grant, and some of the other people. But basically, the idea is to, rather than think that, okay, the only way in which I'm going to find fulfillment and meaning is to kind of jump ship. I'm a marketing professor in a business school,
Yes.
and I was teaching consumer behavior, and I loved it. Okay, but I knew that, so it wasn't as if like I didn't find that to be meaningful, but I did think that teaching a class on happiness would make it even more meaningful for me.
Yeah.
And I just stepped up and put that syllabus together, right? It involves some work, but if it's something that you're passionate about,
Yeah.
I think that most people would be willing to will be motivated to do it. And so
I think your
that's
story is really great, a great illustration, especially for those who are not necessarily entrepreneurial. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
there's some people that go, yeah, I'm going to start my own company. This is how I do it,
Yeah,
you know. But I think most people won't, because it involves a whole slew of other skills that you don't possess
exactly,
necessarily, or even risks you don't want to take, anxiety you don't want to experience, all of
exactly.
that. But in your case, what you did is you have an actual lane, and you invented a lane essentially
Hmm. Hmm.
that is
Hmm.
sort of
Yeah,
adjacent to it, and somehow it was appealing to the students, it appealed to the faculty, and you created a lane for yourself within the sort of broader lane of business school marketing, etc.
100%. Yeah,
That's
and
fantastic.
it could very well have turned out that the students didn't like it, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a risk involved in it. And I hope that if that had been the case, that I would have taken it in my stride. I don't know how I would have reacted to it,
Hmm.
but I'm really happy where I am now. But there's no guarantee that it's going to work out. So
Yeah.
you got to be okay with that too, right? And so that's an important kind of point to make here, that it may not work out. In which case you're back to square one, but at least you didn't like
But it
jeopardize your
seems
whole
to me
family.
that you're a happier man for it, but it did involve work, risk, putting yourself out there, being subject to rejection regardless
Yeah,
in the first
yeah,
place,
100%,
and a real
100%.
possibility of a no, right?
Yeah, yeah.
um,
And after after I started teaching the class, 5 years later, my book came out in 2016,
mhm.
or 6 years later, my book came out. And writing of the book is not something that we're incentivized to do. I'm a tenure track professor, research school. What we're really incentivized to do is to publish peer reviewed articles in journals, okay?
Okay.
And not to write a book, not to write a popular book. And the only reason I did it is because um, there wasn't a textbook on the topic of happiness, and all the material that I was creating and the content I was creating to teach in my classes, I felt that it needed to be out there, in one kind of book in one place. And so I'm just looking at my book right here, and so that's the reason why I put the book out, and that was another risk too. And I did it because I felt like that was the right thing to do. That's what I was passionate about, and it's not something that I could control anymore. I mean, it's just a inner energy that drove me toward that. Doing that activity of writing
So
the
there's
book.
some vitality that comes from it,
Oh yeah,
that
100%.
goes into it and comes out of it and pays off, because here you are, you're a tenured professor, which means you're not at risk of losing your job.
Yeah,
So you don't really need it to keep your
yeah,
job or anything like that. It's not a life or
yeah.
death kind of situation. Furthermore, the incentive is actually to do peer reviewed papers, etc. And you still do this thing, which is a ton of work. You are obviously putting yourself out there for people to dislike it for whatever reason,
Hmm.
and you
Hmm.
still do it, and it feeds back into your happiness, into your motivation. It refines your zeal for something. Correct.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Um,
that's what's going to happen to you too when you put out your book.
that's right. Yeah, it's a lot of work, and it is excruciatingly painful. Not just the process of putting it together, but looking at something and going, "This is terrible. People are going to hate this." Let me make it a little
Right.
bit better. But yes,
Uh-huh.
I really predict that it will be the case, and obviously I've put things out before that were not books that were very similar. There's anxiety
Hmm.
involved and all of that. Why do you think that is? That I observe, at least from my standpoint. Maybe you will disagree with me. We have this incredible country, right? I mean, my book is, big reasons to love America. Uh, I'm a huge fan, right?
Hmm.
I mean, the pursuit of happiness is literally in the founding documents.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
It's a prosperous country. There are choices, there are opportunities. The the ability to switch lanes, careers, states is on an impressive. I mean, just on a whole different level from the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
There's just nothing like it on the planet.
Hmm.
And I find, in the context of this, I would expect people to be incredibly adventurous, really pursuing happiness in its fullest sense,
Hmm.
not in a self-seeking way, not in a
Hmm.
shallow way, but in a profound way. And I find Americans to be extremely averse to those things,
Mm,
and most choosing still, the sure thing, not really wanting to take risks, and then
mhm,
finding themselves sort of in that situation that your book describes.
mhm,
You're
mhm,
so smart and
mhm,
you're not happy. Why do
mm.
you think that is?
Yeah, I think we can talk about other reasons here. We talked about health as being a big reason why the
Yeah.
Americans are not happy. Here you're talking about risk taking tendencies and basically taking full advantage of what America stands for and what it offers, right? I mean, it offers you basically, I think, this idea of the American dream that you can be anything you want to be, right?
Yeah.
Is it certainly is something that it may not actually be 100% true for everyone. I do think that there are some systemic kind of obstacles that are particularly prominent for certain groups versus others, but in general, I agree with you that this is the best country in the world. If you want to really make your own life and you want to work hard, you have initiative and pluck and drive, you can really be far more successful here than in any other country. I truly believe that. Um, I think that there are a couple of things here. One is that, an interesting kind of way to thing to think about is that uh, immigrants, right? By nature, you and I are
Yeah.
immigrants, right? And America is obviously a country of immigrants.
Yes.
Maybe not every single person moved here from another country, but their parents did, or their grandparents did, or somebody like up ahead in the line did.
Yeah.
And if you think about the psychology of being an immigrant, who tends to be an immigrant? Think about it, right, for a minute. America, obviously, these days especially, wants to attract people who are really talented, who are very smart and successful at what they do, etc., etc. Right? They want to get the best students from India, China, Korea, etc., to come here and get their masters and their PhD degrees, etc. Right? But that alone is not enough. I think to be an immigrant, you also have to be somewhat adventurous.
Yes.
You also have to be somewhat risk taking,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so it is in the genetic nature of, in the genes of Americans, even if they are not first generation immigrants themselves, right? Their ancestors were the type to take risks, were the type to be adventurous. There is an innovation or a entrepreneurial kind of bent
Almost like a
among
selection.
Americans,
Yeah, like a cultural selection.
genetics even
Yeah.
selection,
Yeah.
and of course it's kind of probably enhanced, and this is why I think that it is important to understand that while I understand that a lot of Americans feel threatened by immigration and feel that their jobs are going away, and that especially if you have illegal immigration, then those people are sucking up some of the common goods, making it more expensive for everyone else. I think uh, America would start to decline if it really came down hard on immigration, in my opinion. Okay, I think that immigration,
Mm-hmm.
especially talented people,
Well, I mean, and I think that was sort of my caveat is,
mm,
if I mean, you can't have open borders just by
no,
definition, like that
no,
doesn't make a nation out of a
no,
nation.
yeah,
But a policy that would attract entrepreneurial, risk taking people who can
yeah,
contribute, pay taxes,
yeah, hmm,
build stuff, all of that,
yeah,
absolutely 100%.
absolutely, yeah. Right. And so I was going to say that we are in an interesting juncture because the country is kind of middle-aged now, right?
Mm-hmm.
1774 or 1776
Yeah.
was when we got our independence. And so what, we're like 250 years
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
as a country. And so waves of immigrants have come in, each one of them probably a little more adventurous, a little more risk-taking than the people that stayed behind in their
For
countries.
sure.
But,
Yeah.
and you add all that up, so you have an entrepreneurial spirit going, and
Mm-hmm.
you have this dream, American, you've subscribed to the American dream, which is why you've come here. And so all of that, I think, went into being very entrepreneurial. And I think that now we have fifth, sixth, tenth, even generations of people who are Americans, have been Americans for 10 generations now. And so that is probably now not as prominent anymore. That is one reason why you could come up with for why it is that we are not as entrepreneurial, not as risk taking as we used to. Although the immigrants still continue to be, right?
Yes. Yes. But there's still like almost like a critical mass of
Mhm.
almost like a diluted zeal for
Yeah,
that, because when
yeah,
we come, I'm first generation immigrant here. You are fighting for your life, right? You're
Yeah, you have your back to the
you're
wall.
very clear that you're nobody and no one cares about you here.
Yeah,
Like that was my experience. You know,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
so because of that, you work very very hard.
yeah.
And also part of it is the people. What I've observed in people that immigrate, they are, as you said, okay with literally leaving a life behind,
Yeah,
which is
yeah, yeah.
I mean, most people won't do that.
No, yeah, exactly,
They
exactly,
won't do
right.
that.
So something's got to be really bad out there, or you've got to really believe in the American
Yeah,
dream.
so you're
Either
either
way.
running away from something or you're really
Yeah,
or running towards something with a great
yeah.
level of intensity, of determination, and things like that. And I totally, totally agree. And I do think that this saying, strong people, weak people create a bad life. Bad
Mm-hmm,
life creates strong people. Strong people create a
mm-hmm,
good life, and then the
mm-hmm.
good life creates weak people, and the cycle goes on and on.
Right,
And
right,
but I
right,
think what you're describing is that there's a critical mass, perhaps,
yeah,
of people who haven't felt the urgency. They weren't running away from something or towards
yeah.
something, and
Mm-hmm,
they just don't have that drive.
mm-hmm,
And they're essentially weak people, and weak people
mm-hmm,
create a bad life, essentially,
mm-hmm,
not just
mm-hmm,
economically, obviously, but all in
mm-hmm.
all kinds of different ways.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, it could be a systemic explanation for it. Another potential explanation for it is that um, in the in a sense it's all relative, right? And so if you think about other countries relative to America, and what our per capita GDP was earlier compared to now, I think a lot of countries have caught up to America,
hmm
you know
Yeah,
and so you do need certain level of access to resources, etc., to be innovative, and to translate ideas into actual products and offerings and so on. And so a lot of countries are there now, and on top of that, the amount of resources required to offer some of these offerings is not as high, particularly if it's digital
hmm
stuff, right? If it's an app that you create as opposed to an actual product,
yeah,
physical product,
yeah,
doesn't take as much, right? And so you do see a lot of innovations coming in from kind of unexpected quarters, like
absolutely.
Estonia suddenly is producing a Skype, and things like that. So India, China, obviously,
Yeah,
and so it's become a little more of a level playing field, I suppose. That said, though, Christian, I do think that America has still got the big ideas. It's still
yeah, I
got
think so too.
kind of almost a monopoly. I wouldn't call it a monopoly, but it's certainly a dominance in terms of coming up with new innovations and new ideas.
I mean,
And the other thing that,
also paired with a big market and capital
oh yeah,
to
yeah,
to the
yeah,
consuming of the big idea or the product of the offering,
yes,
and the
that
capital to create it.
and on top of that, we happen to be lucky enough to be an English speaking nation.
That's right.
And maybe there's a little bit of a chicken and egg story here, but for whatever reason, English has become the lingua franca, right? Everybody speaks English. Everybody needs
Yeah,
to learn
yeah.
English almost,
I mean,
even in
the
places
dollar,
that
the
hate English.
dollar, the
The
universal.
dollar, yeah, the dollar is the
Yeah,
currency,
yeah,
which I don't know. Hopefully, it'll continue to last, right? But for us Americans, that is.
yeah,
So there's a lot of other systemic kind of factors, structural factors that benefit America. But nevertheless, America is still at the forefront of innovations for the most
yeah.
part.
That's right. Yeah, but I do find that for something like that, and that's just an immigrant's perspective. I think that's normal.
Mhm,
For come from when you come as an adult from the outside here,
mhm.
you look around and you go, how come you guys should be a little bit more happy about being here?
Right, right, right.
A little bit more grateful, right?
Mhm. Right. Right. Yeah, I do think that that is probably an immigrant's perspective. When I first came in, by now I'm adapted to it, but when I first came in, I was actually very pleasantly surprised. Not surprised. I knew to expect it, but nevertheless, it had a positive impact on me, was just seeing the friendliness of people.
Yeah.
This is a little bit different from happiness, but
hmm
just the extroversion of people. People just saying hi to you on the streets, or
Yeah.
inquiring about how your day is going. I know that they're not like 100% serious. And if you actually stop and say, "Oh, my day, let me think about it. Let me tell you how my day is going," they probably have already walked past you. But nevertheless, the idea of engaging with people
Yeah.
that you do not know from Adam,
Yeah.
right, on the streets, I found it to be nice. And that's maybe a reflection of the fact that I'm extroverted too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And you came.
yeah,
What part of India did you come from?
I came from the south.
From the south.
That is where I'm from ethnically, but I grew up all over India because My father was in the railways, so I
Mm.
had a similar upbringing to yours, except that it was all within
Yeah,
India.
and
You've
India
got kind of
India is like a continent unto itself, right?
that's true. That is true. Yeah, but nevertheless, it is. You psychologically, I think it makes a difference if you're just within a country as
Yeah,
opposed to
yeah,
going around the world. And I know you went to Mozambique and to Chile, I think,
yeah.
and
I was all
came
over the
from Russia
place. Yeah,
originally, and so on. So that's a huge amount of
I had
variance.
that same feeling of friendliness because I came from all. I mean, Russia it's not a very it's a very stoic place when it comes to
Yeah,
culture, and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
people just don't smile at each other, and that's partially Russia but partially big city, right? Like if you go to New
Mm.
York, people are less
New
friendly
York
in New
also,
York,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Same
yeah, yeah,
things
yeah,
because it's just too many people to make eye contact
mm,
with.
yeah.
But I found that even moving around America, people are super smiley in California but not very genuine, and
That's true.
and you shift to Texas, and people are actually smiley and genuine at the same time. So
And yeah, yeah,
there's a southern
yeah,
warmth to the
yeah,
interactions that I find just absolutely wonderful. And
yeah,
then I would go to Russia, for example, and just because of I have muscle memory, right? I'm walking down
yeah,
the street and I make eye contact and I
yeah,
smile,
yeah, yeah.
and people go, "What is wrong with you?" Like, so I'm thoroughly Americanized and a Texan, I guess, to make it worse.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't quite work in the streets of Moscow at all.
Hmm. There's actually this funny clip that I saw with Trevor Noah in it, and he talks about why Russians are villains in movies,
Yes,
and
the scary people. Yeah,
he also talks a little bit about the Russian language itself.
yeah,
That is
yeah.
kind of
That it sounds aggressive. So
aggressive. Yeah.
yeah, it's very funny. It's very funny. Oh,
Mhm.
and what he says is that when Russians speak to each other, it's totally fine. It just sounds like a record going backwards. But if it's when they speak English with a Russian
English.
accent,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
it
yeah,
it feels very scary and menacing.
yeah.
you know, I laughed
And
so
I
hard
think
at that bit.
in the
Yeah.
part of the same routine that he talks about why Indians can never be
Oh,
like
that's right.
villains
They're
in
too
movies.
friendly, right? Like, they can't be
Yeah, yeah,
villains. They can't be
yeah.
villains. That's what he says.
They can't be villains. Yeah,
yeah.
really funny.
Yeah, that's hilarious. That's a great routine.
Mm-hmm.
Great insight too. I think it's true. And actually, I have met mafia bosses
In Russia.
oh yeah, yeah.
Oh
You
wow!
know, because
This is when you were
yeah,
kind of touring for the political party. But was it Boris Yeltsin?
yeah, Boris Yeltsin and the 90s in general, starting from 91 all the way up to probably mid 2000s. There was this, when there's no power, there's a vacuum, and vacuum gets filled with something else.
Yeah, yeah,
So because there was no power, it sort of became chaos. The criminal enterprises started flourishing.
yeah,
So
yeah,
starting from 91 all the way to probably late 90s, mafia was everywhere. It was just all. I mean, everybody was mafia. So if you had a business of any kind,
mm,
you needed to have protection. You need to pay somebody for
mm,
protection,
mm,
and it's called
mm,
krisha, which means roof, to have a roof.
mm.
So, and basically, people casually would say to each other, "What? Who's your roof?" Like, I kid you not, this is just that it was that normal. And who's your roof? And they're like, "Oh yeah, this basically gang is my roof," but also
Yeah.
the police were a roof. So
I see.
the police, you can pay the police to be your protection in the same style of mafia, like you literally bring
Mm,
in the money and everything.
mm,
And so
mm,
everybody had a roof, and I mean, the professions would be like, yeah, doctor, plumber, lawyer,
mm,
mafia member.
mm,
You
mm,
could say
mm,
that, and people knew this is what they
mm,
do. I think
mm,
it was probably similar. I'm assuming it was like during Al Capone's time in
in
Chicago,
Chicago. Mm,
the sort of the bootlegging thing. People knew who the
mm,
mafia were. They were just walking the
mm,
streets openly, and everybody knew who they
mm,
were. I think it was
mm.
like that, and so I had many friends who were in the mafia, like many
Wow,
actual friends who were actually
wow.
involved in extortion and
Mm,
racketeering in their past
mm,
lives. And I've
mm,
actually met, and one time I actually had a sit down with the mafia boss, who was literally classic movie style. They own a restaurant, and there was these, big boys with like horrible tracksuits, like really poor taste, and they were around the table looking very grim. And then the mafia boss has an actual cane, I kid you not, because he
mm,
survived already a couple assassination attempts.
Oh my goodness.
and they were offering me protection. They're like, you're doing really well, young man. You're
You need
doing really
protection.
well. How about, you probably need somebody to take care of you, and
Yeah.
and they actually had a, like I'm not exaggerating. The the waitress had a bag of coke on a tray,
Mm.
in case we needed
Cocaine.
cocaine. Yeah, yeah, and they were like, "Hey, you want some?" And I said, "No, thanks." you know.
Oh
So
my
yeah, so
goodness. Wow.
I have a lot of mafia stories. Anyway, we
Mm.
digress now from to something
Yeah,
completely
no,
different.
very interesting though. I mean, I hope some of it at least finds its way into your book.
Some of it, a little bit. The mafia, for some reason, I kept out. I should have not.
Mm. Oh,
But
you've already finished the draft of the book?
yeah, yeah, it's
Finalized?
coming
Okay.
out December, I think. So
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Okay, okay. I didn't know that you were
yeah, yeah. I'm done.
already done with
I'm
it. I
done.
thought it was you're still working on it.
So
Okay.
yeah,
I'd love to be able to read it.
of course you'll be the first one to get a signed copy. Absolutely.
Okay,
You
perfect.
know. So okay. So to wrap this up, would you mind giving us perhaps any just pointers, right? Okay,
Hmm.
you have a middle class situation in America,
Mm.
the way politics are, the way the economy is, the way life is
Yeah.
in America,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you have settled into a life where you don't question the status quo, and you are essentially unhappy. You're not
Hmm.
burned out, you're not like suicidal, but you're
Hmm.
just low grade unhappy all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Do
yeah,
you have
yeah.
any things that people can go, yeah, I can do step 1, step 2, step 3, and I can get out of that funk?
Okay, this is a great question, and it's a good question to end on. So earlier I talked about your quality of your health, your lifestyle, right? I mean, I think that that's a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
I think that you need to improve that. But let's leave that aside for now. Okay, the situation you're describing to me is somebody who's got a job that pays the bills. They've got probably a decent sort of relationship, some friends, family, etc. Nothing really kind of big that's shaking the foundations of their life, and yet they discover that there's a certain emptiness, certain low grade, as you put it, unhappiness. What can you do? So for that subset of people, I really think that it's very, very important to recognize that a big determinant of your happiness is really your attitude towards life and the lens through which you view the life circumstances and the events that happen in your life. This is the proverbial, is your glass half full or half empty,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's right.
So I think it's very, very important to understand the role that that mindset plays and that attitude plays. And it's very insidious in a sense because the attitude is so close to you that you don't even recognize that it's having an effect on your happiness levels, and you don't even in fact realize that you have an attitude towards life. It just comes out in your thoughts, in your sayings, and the things that you say to other people, or how you behave, what decisions you make, how you choose, etc. But you really have to examine it, and I would say that most of us, and certainly the kinds of people that you're describing with low grade unhappiness, almost 100% have subscribed to what I would call a scarcity mindset.
Mm.
So the idea of a scarcity mindset is that these people feel that life is a zero sum game, and there are some winners and losers, and unfortunately have ended up on kind of the losing side. And for me to win, I really have to grab my share, and I have to kind of like basically fight for my share and nudge those winners out in order to get into that winner category. So life is a zero sum game is a very, very strong
Mm.
underlying lay belief, which is very implicit and subconscious, that's operating and really governing the thoughts and behaviors of these people. And so you have to kind of first recognize that you have this belief, and that it's operating what you think and how you behave. And then you really have to be motivated to change it into more of an abundance mindset. Okay, and the fear here, of course, is for a lot of people who subscribe to the scarcity mindset is that it's going to actually affect my outcomes. I may not be able to survive if I have an abundance mindset. And if I'm not vigilant and untrusting, then maybe somebody will come and take all my positions away, or my competitor in my office is going to get the promotion and I won't.
Mm-hmm.
So here's where you have to actually at some level have a little bit of faith and experiment with it in order to discover whether that fear is actually true and well founded. What the research at least shows is that it's not going to affect you badly. In fact, if anything, it's going to make life better for you. And the idea of an abundance mindset is that I actually have enough. I have more than enough going for me. How is it that I can be of help to other people.
Ah.
Okay. And once you adopt that abundance mindset, then what it does is that it not only helps you have more relaxing thoughts and a more positive attitude, more easy laugh. You might be doing serious things, but not taking yourself so seriously, right? That thing that I talked about earlier, you'll be more of a giver rather than a taker in your relationships with other people, more willing to share, less untrusting, less vigilant, etc. And if you have this cluster of kind of behaviors and traits, what the research at least shows is that you're actually going to enhance your chances of being promoted. There's at least two reasons why it happens. One reason is that in a kind of hyper connected world that we live in with social media, et cetera, what other people think of you and whether they like you is a bigger determinant of your chances of being promoted than your actual skill levels. I'm not saying that skill levels don't count. Obviously they do. You can't be like really bad at what you do in order to get promoted. But if there are two people who are more or less equal in terms of the core
Skills.
job
Yeah.
skills, but one of them is really significantly better liked, I can guarantee you that person is going to get promoted.
Is that because of an emotional connection of the hiring person, or because they rationally understand that somebody more positive will contribute to the workforce? Probably both,
I
right?
think it could be both. I think that if it's the second argument, then that's used more as a justification for a decision that's already emotionally made. We have this series of studies on this in a variety of contexts. We are highly emotional as a species,
Yeah, yeah. Our
and it's
decisions
really
are
served us well.
emotional.
Yeah.
Our decisions tend to be more emotional decisions than rational decisions.
Yeah, and to the extent rationality does play a role, it plays a role of kind of post hoc rationalization,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Justifying a decision that's already been made emotionally is where the rationality comes in a
Really,
lot of
wow.
times. Yeah. So yeah, you're going to get promoted. You have a much higher chance of being promoted. And so this fear that if I transition into a mindset of abundance, it's actually going to hurt my chance of surviving and all that is really, once you start to kind of play around with it and experiment with it, you'll discover that that's a myth. It's a fear we have that, but it's not really well founded. The big question though is how do you kind of transition into an abundance mindset?
Yeah.
It's a tough thing to do. So here's where I think that I can suggest three very, very, very powerful things you can do. All of them, unfortunately, are going to take diligence. All of them are going to take some work and discipline, but they are definitely going to work. And I'm so sure that they're going to work that if they don't work for you, come to me and I'll write you $100 check at least. Okay,
I
if
like
not
that.
more.
I like that.
Yeah,
What are
I'll
they?
do that. Yeah. So the first one is to maintain something called a three good things journal. So every single day, at the end of the day, take out your journal and write in it three good things that happened to you that day. Okay. And it's very important to write about good things that were not egotistical. That is, that you didn't really work hard towards achieving those things. They're not a promotion or a bonus that you got or praise and things like that. Okay. These are things that you did not work for and you did not really earn, but they were handed to you, right? It could be little things like, you lost a pair of glasses and you didn't know where they were, and all of a sudden here they are. You just happened to run into them. They were under your car seat, maybe, right? Or somebody that you had kind of like completely lost touch with, all of a sudden they contacted you, right? So things that you did not earn, you did not work toward, things that happened to you, positive things. Okay, now it needs to be authentic in the sense that you can't just come to the end of the day and say, okay, let me think about three positive things. What can it be? What can it be? And then say, oh, I was born in a good family. Fine. I mean, like if you do it maybe 1 or 2 days like that, it's fine. But really, it has to be things that happened that particular day. And so, what I do in my phone on my notes page, I actually have a notes page that says three good things.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh huh.
And on the three good things note page. So I don't know if you can see it. Three good things.
Okay.
Oh, oops.
There you go. Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so I write as they're happening, on that day. I
Okay.
just make a note
Uh huh.
because othervess you're going to forget.
Yes.
Most likely
Yeah.
you're going to feel
You're
like you should
acknowledging it.
remember.
You're recording it,
You're
making.
recording it.
You're not letting it just brush over you. You're saying,
Yeah,
"Oh, I need to register this."
register this. Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
But even the brushing over earlier before you were doing this exercise, maybe you would have kind of like been happy that some good thing happened, but not really recognize that this means that you're lucky. This means that you're kind of special in a non-egotistical way, right? That
Mm-hmm.
universe has your back. It's
Yeah.
looking out for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the thing. We have a scarcity mindset, most of us, for a reason. Back in our evolutionary past, it was important to be scarcity minded because things were in fact scarce.
Yeah.
The
That's right.
resources were scarce, and so we had to be watchful. But we live in an era, like you pointed out, especially in this beautiful country, where the average person has all the basic needs met. We
Actually,
don't
we're
need
eating too much.
too much, in fact, of anything, right?
So
Yeah,
yeah, too much
right.
food.
Exactly. So we don't need to worry about survival. That's we can take it for granted,
Yeah.
right? Not in a bad way, but that is not our concern. Our concern is more flourishing and thriving and being cooperative and nice and
Hmm.
friendly and happy and joyful. And so if you want to get there, you really have to recognize the name of the game has changed. It's not surviving, it's flourishing. And so to flourish, it's much better to have an abundance mindset. And the question is, how do you build it? So you have to overcome the subconscious mind's tendency to be negatively oriented
Yeah,
and look at things that you don't have and make it more positive oriented, and look at things that you're grateful for, you could be grateful for, that
that makes sense.
you
Yeah.
have in your feet.
Do you want to build a truly extraordinary life, what we call an exponential life? My weekly newsletter brings you insights, stories, expert conversations, my favorite books and podcasts every Sunday. Subscribers get exclusive access to my monthly group coaching webinars, all for free. And for the cost of a latte a month, you can help support our work and access our full archives. Subscribe at christianrayflores.com.
That's practice number one. But you have to be diligent. Like I said, it won't be an immediate effect. It's like going and working out at the gym. You're not going to see those muscles immediately.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you, in 6 months of doing this, if people don't come up to you and say, "You look happy," you
Hmm.
look like you just have this like bounce in your step
Yeah, that's
and
right.
a certain inner joy that comes out.
Yeah, yeah.
By the way, Christian, I mean, obviously you have it because one can see it, right? There's a glow,
Yeah.
and it comes from this practice of great. I mean, this is really a gratefulness
Yeah,
practice,
yeah,
right? But I'm just
absolutely.
making it more specific. I'm saying that it's not just things that you work towards. It's very important to avoid those. Those are ego. Those lead to pride, and that's good. It has its place. But really, you are looking for things that change the narrative you have about the quality of the universe, or a fundamental truth about the universe. And
Yeah.
a lot of us, whether we realize it or not, believe that that truth is that the universe is out to get you, and that
Hmm.
if you're not fighting for your rights, you're going to be trodden by other people.
That's right.
You've got to fight for your share, and you're changing that narrative to the narrative that the universe has your back. The universe is bountiful. The universe is benign,
Hmm.
right? And there is love. And so that is the transition, that you want to nurture the abundance mindset, and walk away from a scarcity mindset. And the two other things are, don't look at the news, right?
I like that
At
one.
least take a break from the news. Once in a while, take a break. I know it might sound like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be so uninformed. There's so many things going on. I need to be plugged in, right? Uh, if the urge to look at the news is controlling you rather than you controlling
Yeah.
when it is you look at the news, I think that's a very important thing to be aware of. Are you doing it by kind of like in a reflexive way, where you're just reaching out for your phone as soon as you wake up to look at Fox News, CNN, whatever it is, so take a break. I think that you'll notice that within a week it really kind of
Yeah.
lightens you a lot.
I agree. I've noticed that I think there are times where I allow myself to watch news, let's say right before the election, right after. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's a big thing for our country. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
But even that, you can really binge and get really burned
Oh
out,
yeah.
even within like 2, 3 weeks post
Yeah.
election.
Mm-hmm.
That happened to me when the Ukraine war broke out because I had so many friends in Kiev, and I
Yeah.
was on the phone with them, and I was so glued to the TV set, I just found
Mm-hmm.
myself in burnout within weeks, in
Yeah.
complete burnout,
Yeah.
just anxious.
Yeah, it's a vortex. It'll just suck you in.
Yeah, and I had to like I actually took my wife to Mexico for 10 days, and I'm like, everything is off. Like I uninstalled all the apps in my phone because I did not want to hear it. And within a week I was back to normal. So I think
Yeah,
I've seen that work in my life for sure.
100%. And obviously, you have the resources to go to Mexico. That's great, right? And not all people might have that, and so they might have to find other ways to kind of
Hmm.
cover that, exposure to news and negativity. And the third is to seek out abundance minded people and abundance minded books,
Yeah.
abundance minded videos, movies.
Hmm.
um, we are a function of what we expose ourselves to, right? And so if you kind of like are surrounded by scarcity minded people who are in one way or the other, if you kind of look beyond what it is that they're saying to the underlying narrative, what is the worldview that they're subscribing to, I think you'll discover that a lot of people who are otherwise interesting, maybe smart and well, articulate and all that, really are spinning a narrative of scarcity, right? And that is their underlying belief. And they're coming at it from a standpoint of, I am right, you're wrong, or I've been treated unfairly, or we've been treated unfairly. It's seductive in that sense. It's
Yeah.
nice to be like in the position of a victim who wants to claim their
Well, you can
rightful
you
share.
can you can hide behind it. You can
Yeah.
rationalize all kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's comfortable, basically, right? It's
Yeah, it is definitely comfortable. It's easier to put the blame on the external world and other people, and play the victim. But it is only gratifying in the short run. I think that in the long run, it erodes into you.
yeah, yeah,
It's similar to eating tasty food. It might be gratifying in the short run, but it's going to lead to diabetes. And, if you don't control it, that is. So I think that if you choose your stimuli carefully, and by stimuli I mean all the things that we expose ourselves to, including people. But people are the most important in this because we are highly social as a species, and there's a phenomenon called emotional contagion and goal contagion. So we absorb other people's emotions and their goals and their narratives and their perspectives, and so even without realizing it. And so I think that, and who's abundance minded in your life? I think most people would. These are the people who are more chill. In many people's lives, it tends to be grandparents, who have kind of like reached, you know, I've seen enough ups and downs in their life. They reached a certain stage in their life where they have a more wider perspective on
yeah.
things. I'm not saying all of them, but many of them tend to be less caught up in the rat race.
Yeah, you call those people, it's wise, right? Wisdom.
Wise, exactly, exactly,
Yeah.
wise, yeah. So reach out to those kinds of people, just share an evening tea with them, watching a sunset, those kinds of things. And sometimes it can seem like it's a little bit boring to do those things if you're caught up in this kind of like a revenge narrative and a scarcity oriented set of narratives. You almost seek those kind of high highs and low lows,
Yeah.
because it's like a drug. That's what you're used to, right? The drama. So it might take a little bit of transitional discomfort, or getting used to. But anything that you can do in order to kind of shift away. Like you said, you took a week off to Mexico. Kudos to you. Hats off. That's like, I'm sure that it was like, I still want to know what's going
Yeah, I
on.
did. Yeah, I just had
Yeah,
to. I
yeah,
just had to
yeah,
disconnect.
you just have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the thing is that, as one of my cousins put it, uh, I'm exercising right now out of choice, and he has diabetes, because my doctor told me that, look, you can do it out of choice, or later on you can do it out of compulsion. It's
That's
up to
right.
you.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of decide. And in your case, it seems like it reached a point where it was out of compulsion in
Oh
that
yeah,
case.
I just couldn't do it. Yeah, I had to. It was just too intense, I guess. For a very very intense, all of a sudden, very
Yeah.
dramatic, and these are people that I
And
know.
yeah, and the point is, it can happen to anyone,
Yeah,
right? That's the
yeah,
other thing,
yeah.
is that, I mean, you're obviously thinking about these kinds of things a lot, and yet you were caught up in it, right? And
That
so
was,
that
yeah.
can happen. That's life. Yeah. So those are the things I'd share.
That's good, man. Well, this is golden stuff. This is fantastic, pure gold, my friend. Okay, so I have a question that I want to ask you at the end. Um, if you were to speak to your younger self in a pivotal moment, and it could be
Hmm.
whatever age you can imagine,
Hmm.
what would you say to yourself from your now perspective,
Hmm.
your the
Hmm.
wisdom, the place you're
Hmm.
in life, etc.
Hmm. 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 So it's a very interesting question, and I've been asked variants of this question by other people, and other people have been asked this question too. And to me, sorry to kind of like go off on a little bit of tangent here, but one of the usefulness, I feel, reasons why this is a useful question is because I think that the fact is that we're not going to go back to be a younger self, right?
Yeah,
I mean, time only moves forward. We can't go backward. But the reason why this is useful is because we can see how uh, we could imagine an older self of ourselves telling us something now,
yeah.
right? So this is kind of like
That's
the,
why. Yep.
not the other side necessarily, but it's a slightly different question, but a similar flavor to it is, imagine a future self
Mm-hmm.
of yourself. What would that future self tell you right now, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you could imagine a
Yeah.
kind of a twist to the question like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I were to kind of answer that question, I think it would be a similar answer to the question that you asked me, which is that what would I tell my younger self, which is that I would just tell this younger self that, look, don't worry, you know uh, there is a way in which everything makes sense, or even if it doesn't at some level makes sense, you'll be convinced that it makes sense. Your mind is a magical thing, and the universe is a magical thing, and that there is a tendency, and there is a lot of research in this area called post-traumatic growth. So this is
Yeah.
not just like routine, everyday negative things that happen to people. This is traumatic events that happen to
Yeah.
people. People have a way of reconciling to those hugely negative things and growing, not just like reconcile, like, growing from it and becoming enhanced and being more capable of, enjoying everyday ordinary events to a greater extent, finding fulfillment in relationships, identifying what their passion is, becoming more spiritual. All of these kind of things happen as a result of traumatic events. And so I would just tell my past self, I can kind of remember lots of occasions in which, I failed an exam, for example, or there was a period in which my visa to the United States was getting delayed a little bit. My Ph.D. Program in the University of Arizona, where I started, broke up, and I had to transfer schools. Lots of really, and break up with a girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, etc. So a lot of really, negative events where I just got sucked into that negativity to such an extent that I was not open to what is going on around me. I wasn't taking in life. I was kind of half dead and, throwing a pity party and so on. And so I would just tell my past self, everything is going to work out. Okay, everything is going to work out. Just trust life. Just have this immense faith that you're taken care of, right? And really, I mean, it's a leap. It's like a scary thing to do, but just throw yourself out there into the universe's arms and say, take care of me. I know you take care of me. You've always taken care of me. Please continue to do so. I know that you're going to do it. Everything is going to work out. Everything is going to work out. I think it was John Lennon or somebody who said that in the end, everything is going to work out. And if things haven't worked out, it's not the end.
That's right. Yeah.
Or something to that effect. So that's what I would tell my past self. And it's the thing that I remind myself of today. I know that my future self is going to feel that way. I feel.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree. And I love that question. I think the reason I asked that question, I actually use it all the time now with the people I work with, because somebody taught me that. When I did that exercise in detail, I wrote myself a letter. The
Mm.
the way it helped me is that it gave me this incredible sense of deeper compassion towards myself.
Mm. Mm.
You
Mm.
know, just the deepest compassion. It's just such a
Mm.
joy to
Mm.
speak to
Mm.
somebody like that. And I
Mm.
think what you mentioned is actually very true. The reverse is true, is that by
Mm.
saying that to your younger self, your older self is also speaking to your
Saying
present
it again.
self.
Mhm.
And you just
Mhm.
become lighter immediately because
Yeah.
you just
Yeah.
said, oh, I love myself a little bit more. I give
Yeah.
myself a little
Yeah.
bit more credit,
Yeah.
et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. So I think it's a really
Yeah.
powerful thing to
Yeah.
to try
It's
to
awesome.
think of. Yeah. Raj, my
Awesome.
friend, always an absolute joy, both offline and online. But thank you for giving us your time. Really,
Yeah,
really appreciate
absolutely.
it.
And thank you for thinking of inviting me again. And I obviously also enjoyed a lot. And I hope that there'll be a hat trick in the future. At some point, we'll have a third event. We'll see.
You got it.
Yeah. And this is a comment offline. I think more of an offline thing, I should say, but let's meet up offline.
We will. We will.
Okay. All right.